Whoa! Oh, this gets me going.
Yep, that's exactly how I felt after reading the TWAB this week. Good morning, everybody. I know, I'm pretty late to covering the TWAB. This video is probably going to bomb viewership-wise, but I know there's a very vocal group of you that love whenever I cover news on the channel, so this video is dedicated to you. Now, the TWAB that Bungie released yesterday was quite possibly the biggest one I've ever seen, and pretty much covered everything we need to know about weapons in the Witch Queen. I spent a lot of time going over and studying the information, so I hope to present it to you in a pretty digestible fashion and not by just reading off every single line word for word. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, kicking things off, let's talk about weapon crafting and how it's going to work whenever Witch Queen drops. Now, Bungie tells us that when launch day comes, the first 2 missions of Witch Queen are going to be free for all players and are going to end in us being introduced to this area called the Enclave, where all of our weapon crafting will take place. There's going to be a short introductory quest here that'll give us the materials to craft our first weapon, which is going to be a glaive, and it'll also tell us how to get all these materials ourselves for future crafting. Now, I can imagine that the glaive itself will not be available for free-to-play players since it's a Witch Queen weapon, but with Bungie making this area accessible for free-to-play, like on purpose allowing them to get here, I can imagine other weapons will be craftable here for those free-to-play players. Now, moving on though, Bungie says that in order to craft a weapon, we will need to first earn the pattern for said weapon, or in simpler terms, we will need to earn the weapon blueprint. Now, these can be gotten through quests or just completing random gameplay objectives, so I'm sure, for example, like to get a raid weapon pattern, perhaps you'll need to complete a challenge in a particular raid encounter in order to be able to craft a weapon from said encounter. Now, let's say we obtain a pattern for a weapon we like. How do we go about putting the specific perks and traits on our weapon that we want? Well, Bungie says that after reaching the Enclave, all random rolled weapons throughout the game will have the chance to drop with something called Deep Sight Resonance. You'll know you have a deep sight weapon when the border of said weapon is red, but what does this really mean? Basically, a deep sight weapon will have an objective attached to it that, when completed, will allow you to extract the essence of a perk on the weapon to then use at the Enclave crafting table. For example, if I get an auto rifle to drop for me as a deep sight weapon and it has One for All as a perk, I can complete the objective tied to that weapon, extract the essence of the One for All perk once completed, and then I'll be able to assign One for All to other weapons that I craft. Now, let's say that we have the weapon pattern that we want, we found some deep sight resonance weapons, extracted their perks by completing the objectives, and finally crafted the weapon that we wanted. Now what do we do? Well, Bungie says that once you craft your weapon, you may then begin to increase the level of the weapon by using it when completing activities and killing enemies. By leveling up your weapon, you enhance the stats and traits of said weapon, which will give you additional bonuses. So by the end of it, you'll be able to tell who just crafted their god-rolled weapon, and who's crafted theirs long ago and has been using it for an extended period of time and giving it insane stat boost as it levels up. Bungie says that the crafting table does offer an option to reshape your existing weapons as well, and this means to modify them. So once you craft a weapon that you really like, and let's say you want to change a perk on it, you're about to go into a raid, and let's say that you have Vorpal on the weapon, but you want to have firing line because you're going to be around teammates all the time. You can swap out that perk, you can swap out the mags and barrels by reshaping the weapon at the crafting table, and this is to keep you from feeling locked down to one singular path for any given gun. Now, everything that we've spoken about thus far is concerning legendary weapons, and Bungie clarifies that with exotic weapons like the glaives and the new SMG, we will be able to craft and modify them, but only to the extent of things like barrels and mags to retain their exotic feel without straying too far off. The last thing Bungie talks about in regards to weapon crafting is the new weapon cosmetics that are dubbed mementos. Now, these are basically activity-specific cosmetics / stat trackers for weapons. With Witch Queen's launch, we'll be getting a Gambit one, and these can be applied to weapons once they reach their max level, and in the future, we'll be seeing mementos from areas of the game like trials, grandmasters, etc. So this is basically like legendary weapon ornaments that you can earn through playing, specific activities, and they'll also have specific stat tracks. Like with Gambit, you could have something like invader kills as a specific stat track for your weapon. Now, that should wrap up everything that we need to know about weapon crafting. That's everything that Bungie went over in the most simple and digestible terms that I could put it into. So let's go ahead and go over the new weapons that are confirmed to come to the Witch Queen that we saw through this TWAB. Now, the first weapon that we do get a look at is the new Savathûn Throne World ARC auto rifle, the 𝗁𝗵𝗃𝗏. Now, unfortunately, this is a 360 RPM auto, making it pretty dog dookie right out the gates, but perhaps Bungie plans on buffing these or giving this weapon very unique perks to choose from. Now, what's weird about this auto is that you can also see it as a solar weapon in another screenshot here where Bungie is discussing weapon crafting. So I don't know if this means that we'll be able to swap weapon elements in some way, or this is just an early look where the element wasn't 100% decided on yet, but I figured I'd mention it just in case. Now, moving on from the 𝗁𝗵𝗃𝗏, we get a new look at a Stasis SMG. This weapon is also from the Throne World, is a 600 RPM, and it goes by the name of Forensic Nightmare. And I'm glad that we finally have a new kinetic 600 RPM, because the one from Season of the Hunt is nice, but nothing crazy. This is going to be one that a lot of us are going to be putting into our Stasis build, so I can't wait to get my hands on this one. Now, lastly, for the Savathûn Throne World weapons, we have this unidentified rocket launcher in the screenshot. We literally know nothing about it, but I saw it in the inventory of a Guardian, so I figured I would point it out. Now, next up from the Throne World weapons, we have a special look at the new pursuit weapon for next season, the Reckless Endangerment. Now, unfortunately, this looks to be a PvP weapon as it comes with a new perk called Steady Hand, which will give it mass handling after a kill, and it also rolls with Snapshot. I'm sure there might be a second, avenue of perks here on this shotgun, maybe Trench Barrel, 1-2 Punch, something more PvE oriented, but from the looks of it and what Bungie said in the information that they gave, not looking too hopeful here. Now, moving on from the pursuit weapon, we have the entirety of the world loot pool being reworked and being filled with 12 foundry weapons. And for those that don't know what foundry weapons are, they're weapons that are specifically made by companies like Suros, 𝗁𝗏𝗄, Amalon, and Væst in the Destiny world. Now, lastly, as far as the new weapons are concerned, we also get a sneak peek at the new core playlist weapons, and these are also foundry themed, with the Gambit one being the only one we have any information on. And Bungie says it's yet again another high impact frame auto rifle, and that this one is going to be solar element. So with all these high impact frames being seen throughout this reveal, I really hope a buff is inbound for the archetype. But this is really cool news. The entirety of the world loot pool is getting changed to have what's probably going to be rehashed weapons. A lot of these look like weapons I've seen in Destiny Vanilla, but they are weapons that have never gotten random rolls, and as we'll be going over in the future, these weapons are actually going to be getting something really, really interesting. So speaking of the really interesting thing, let's move on over to some information that we have regarding some Weapons 3.0 style of changes. And that's going to be starting with a new third main perk slot that'll be known as an origin trait. Now, if you didn't catch on to it earlier, this new third perk can be seen right here next to the kill tracker in this screenshot. Anyways, origin traits are essentially a new third perk column that is determined by the origin of the weapon. For example, a weapon from GM Nightfalls will have a different origin trait compared to a weapon that drops from Trials. Witch Queen is dropping with 14 origin traits, and as the seasons progress, Bungie will actually be adding more of these to things like old raid weapons or seasonal loot to give those weapons new life. Now, some examples of origin traits can be seen on screen, and I won't read them all, but some of the examples are Nightfall weapons. The origin traits that these will have will be partially refilling your mag and triggering health regeneration after stunning a champion. So that's going to be huge for GMs. For strikes, their origin trait will be giving health back on final blows. Love this addition. It makes weapons feel super unique, and I really can't wait to see all of the origin traits in action and what all of them are going to be as time goes on. Now, these origin traits will also apply to the world loot pool weapons, what I was alluding to earlier, but instead of having a single trait for everything in the world loot pool, it'll actually be dependent on the foundry that the weapon belongs to. And an example of this would be like for the Væst weapons, chance on damage to partially refill the weapon magazine. I'm not sure if this is dealing damage to an enemy or having damage dealt to you, but some really cool stuff there. We're also going to be getting some nice quality of life changes for weapons as well, in the form of kill trackers now becoming a default option and no longer only appearing once a weapon is fully masterwork. So people who use exotics without a catalyst, rejoice. The next quality of life change here is that Bungie is also applying the same treatment that armor mods got to weapons. So weapon mods are going to be instantly applicable and cost nothing to do so. So we'll be able to swap mods super fast, just like we can on armor. Now the last major thing here for the weapons 3.0 changes is, and this is a big one, exotic primary weapons in all trace rifles will now deal 40% extra damage to minor enemies, and this damage increase is inclusive to exotic perks like explosions for Sunshot or lightning from Trinity Ghoul. This is going to make so many weapons incredibly viable inside of in-game content, with guns like Ace of Spades, for example, potentially one-shotting enemies and GMs. I'm super pumped for this change, and you guys would definitely need to let me know what kind of weapons you plan on breaking out in 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏 due to this change. I'm really glad to see that not only, trace rifles as well. Trace rifles are going to become more dangerous, so to speak. 𝗟𝗛𝗡𝗍 is going to be even better, and it's already really good. And, just plenty of primary weapons are going to be viable in the end game, and this is something that we haven't really seen. This is Bungie answering the age-old complaint that primary weapons hit like a wet noodle. Well, if you don't want them to hit like a wet noodle, then equip an exotic one. So I really like this change a lot, and I can't wait to see what it's like in practice. Now, that's about it as far as the weapon 3.0 kind of changes go, so let's talk about some PvE weapon tuning. First up, high impact fusions are going to now deal 5% extra damage inside of PvE. Blinding and concussion grenades had their damage nerfed by 25%, but the blinding and stun effects will remain unchanged. Rocket archetypes will now differ in damage, whereas previously the archetype meant nothing if it wasn't a precision frame. So precision frames now deal the least amount of damage with a 0.95 times multiplier, while aggressive frames can go up to a 1.05 times multiplier. Next up, pulse rifles will now deal 10% more damage to minor enemies. Fat dub right there. Ruinous Effigy's blocking sphere attack, the damage on that was increased by 66%, and multi-kills with the sphere can now make orbs of power. And finally, the Ikelos SMG had some stats nerfed, but now has an increased zoom value. And finally, the last thing that Bungie goes over is some perk tuning. So again, we're going to be taking a look at all of this, but only for PvE. 𝗏𝗍𝗄𝗏 has now increased duration from 5 to 7 seconds, and has had its damage increased by 5%. 𝗏𝗍𝗄𝗏 also now gets increased range when active, and now has a timer for the buff when active. Dual loaders reload speed, the perk for shotguns, the penalty was reduced by -50 to -35. Danger Zone is indirectly getting a buff as grenade launcher self-damage is being reduced from 1.25 times to 0.75 times to make proccing the perk, forgive my pun, less dangerous. Next up, 𝗶𝗏𝗄𝗏 is getting its expected nerf, which for some reason, people on my Twitch channel told me I was crazy for suggesting that 𝗶𝗏𝗄𝗏 was definitely going to get nerfed, but I kind of had a feeling since Bungie has always had a weird relationship with movement in this game. So for those of my guys that are out there that are yeeting themselves all over the place, enjoy it while you still can. And lastly, the perks Bottomless Grief, Celerity, Underdog, Shield Disorient, and Air Assault are all being put into the DCV, meaning they will no longer roll on future weapons. With all that said, that is everything you need to know from Bungie's most recent TWAB. Well, everything if you're a PvE player. This channel is heavily, PvE focused. For those of you guys that are watching up until this point, you probably already knew that, so I didn't bother covering the PvP stuff as there's already a bunch of information here, and I didn't want to make things more convoluted by covering an aspect of the game that I don't even like. So anyways guys, I hope you all enjoyed the video today. This is a pretty fun one to make, all things considered, since I didn't rush myself into making a half-assed video, and I actually got to sit back, relax, and take some time on this one and, really enjoy the information and really absorb it and, make a script and put it into video form. For those that don't know, before the video ends, my G Fuel code is 30% off on the website right now, and using the link in the description will automatically apply my code at checkout. I just want to give a massive shout out to both 𝘁𝗔𝗏 and 𝗍𝗏 on Twitter for using my code on the site and supporting the channel. If you guys, are a big fan of anything with caffeine in it, like I am, and want to stock up before 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏, definitely suggest going and checking out G Fuel's website. Been drinking, this company's products for like 3 years now. Really like their stuff, and if you guys like caffeine, then you'll probably like it as well. Anyways, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you again to all of you guys for watching. I know this video isn't going to do crazy numbers, but for my dedicated audience out there, I hope you enjoyed this one. Stay awesome, everybody, and I'll see you guys next time.